Another good housekeeping bit of information I was told is that there are munchies back in the corner. So not only do we get fed by our speakers, but we get to actually feed our stomachs while we're listening to the speakers. So that's, I don't know if you can do that at every men's conference, but at ours you can. You can eat and listen simultaneously, and drink coffee, and drink water, and take notes, and so it's all good. You know, I was fascinated by that, the whole motif that Dr. Creamer set up about chasms and then bridges, the chasms between followers of Christ and the culture, and then he's going to talk about the bridges that we can walk across into the culture, and then how we can walk across those. Those are basically the three areas he's going to hit. And Dr. Creamer, I don't know if you're done with the chasms yet, and are not quite, but I know you're going to get to the bridges. And it really resonated with me this time, about this time last week. I was in a park in California on vacation. I was at a booth for the San Diego Atheist Association. And man, chasms, very obvious chasms. I tried to dialogue with them. There was very little common ground. We agreed that objective reality existed. That was about it. Otherwise, the presuppositions were so wide, we just couldn't talk to each other, not in any meaningful way. You know, but then I thought the chasms there were obvious. But then that night, I was talking to one of my brothers-in-law, who's a decent guy, great family, not a believer. Same chasms, basically. And we weren't really talking about spiritual things. He and I have before. He wouldn't agree with the atheists. He wouldn't see himself as aligned with them, but he really is. He really is. The same chasms are there. So I'm going to be really interested to hear a little bit more about the chasms, and about the bridges, and then later on how to walk across those bridges. So, Dr. Creamer, come on back up, and anxious to hear what you have to say.
Appreciate it. All right, I'm going to bring some tea with me this time, if y'all don't mind. Actually, I'm going to knock that off, so I'll just hang on to it. I know how that is, you know. You do one of those, and oh, there you go, nice and safe. The things we started out talking about, we need to continue on. You can see we've actually only done a third of this topic as I have it laid out. The second part's pretty complex also, but it's not as, it's more step by step. So here's what we'll do. If you get, and this is again just one of 5 different things we could have talked about, 2 of which I think are fundamentally important. So we chose one of those as an example of where the shifts have to happen. I think it's one of the 2 big ones. In order for us to recognize where we should be on the other side of the chasm that you were talking about. And boy, are you right. It doesn't matter to me whether a person says they're an atheist or they just happen to be a person who votes on this issue that way. I know from those statements, if they are on the same side of their worldview, I'm not going to get to them unless I establish a relationship and I have time to work through the fundamental issues, you know, it's not just going to be a one-line, hey, I proved you're wrong about atheism, so you come to faith. I did a debate with the Collin County, what they call it, Free Thinkers Society, which is their atheist club, you know, at Collin College, I mean. And they had about 350 people there with them, and I had about 100 people who came out. It wasn't my event, so I was just showing up, but a few friends came out. And so we had all those people there, and the atheists who were there, yeah, I mean, even just saying something as simple as this, I knew they wouldn't agree. I said, now I know y'all don't think of it this way. We were talking about where we fit in nature. And I said, but we actually believe that God created the universe for man, for us, that there was a thing that he did when he created us so that we would be over creation. We have a responsibility. When I said God actually created all of the universe for mankind, they just broke out laughing. It was so unthinkable to them. It wasn't even mean-spirited. It wasn't like they were throwing food at me. It was just they were so shocked that somebody would say publicly that God created the universe for the purpose of mankind's existence. They just thought that was so absurd they couldn't help but laugh. That's a fundamental divide on a worldview. But it is the point of saying, if you believe in purpose, then you believe that God could put all this together for a purpose that has to do with people or whatever else He wants it to be about. So, recognizing the chasm is the first big barrier. So, the way this plays out, so what I did this in 3 steps for you. The big worldview issue that changed in our thinking. It doesn't change because of Darwin. That's the reason I read that to you, was to say, Darwin doesn't introduce an idea and everybody goes, oh, that's a great idea, we should adopt that. Darwin reintroduced an idea that was thousands of years old, and the worldview of the culture had changed sufficiently by that time that people read it and said, that's the answer we've been looking for. That's the one we've been looking for. And that's why they jump on board the ship. The worldview had already shifted. The ability to say it out loud and now for it to become ensconced with us moves all along, which is why there is still such a debate between evolutionists and Christians. Not because there aren't Christians who are evolutionists, but because the presumption about evolution, regardless of what you think about it scientifically or any other way, the presumption about evolution is its manifestation of and relationship with a worldview that says you don't have to explain things in terms of God. You can explain them without God. That's what made it appealing at the moment it became what it was. And so, regardless of what you think about evolution as a theory, the reality is you have to recognize evolution's influence on the worldview because of what I said earlier. So anyway, all of that was to lay the groundwork, basically, of the worldview issues at their deepest level, and then to take the second step and say, so how does that play out in the way people functionally think about the world? The categories with which they see the world, different way of thinking. So I gave you 2 examples of Western worldviews that are in our culture, postmodernity and existentialism. They're very closely related. They're distinct, but they're very closely related, that come out of this shift that's taken place over the last couple of hundred years in our culture. These 2 elements, postmodernity and existentialism, really only take shape over the last 70 years or so. I mean, you could say over the last 100 years, you could go back to Kierkegaard and say 200 years, but they didn't adopt the whole worldview. They just introduced some of the ideas that allowed it to move in that direction, So postmodernity, let's take this. We use the word all the time. That's fairly postmodern. It means a very specific thing. And the 4 characteristics, I can't go into a whole lecture about postmodernity, but the 4 characteristics of postmodernity that stand out are these. That is, when you run into somebody who's a true postmodern, whether they call themselves postmodern or not. By the way, the only way to have a postmodern society, in my opinion, is also to have a modern society. Modern means, basically for us it means mid-20th century way of thinking. They're industrial, they make sense, you can organize it top down, you can bureaucratically fix things, you can take hold on and understand the world around you and use science and technology and all those things to make it better. That's what we can do. So that kind of modern way of thinking, progressive, Whiggish, with human willpower and ingenuity, we can solve problems. That's the modern world that we lived in throughout the mid-20th century. Most of us still live in that world. Most of us are modern. The postmoderns now, they'll describe everything contrary to that. So whatever modern is, they want to be the opposite of that, which is, you could call it anti-modern. It is deliberately against modernity. It sees the weaknesses in modernity and tries to run the other direction. So postmodern thinkers. Not postmodernism, that's an art movement, Postmodernity, the idea that people think in postmodern terms. So whether they use the name or not, what they appeal to are these 4 things. Mystery, meaning they don't believe everything can be explained. So in our world, and the way the American culture is generally, we tend to think that if we work hard enough at it, long enough at it, we will find everything. You could use cartography as an example of this, map making. We go from, during the modern period, having no maps of the distant regions of the world to having explorers who go to every part of the world and map it. This is the important thing. They develop a map so somebody else can get there, so we can comprehend the entire world. Then we realize we can go all the way around it, we can circumnavigate the globe, we can draw the globe, we can put images on it, and we become more and more accurate about it. We stop writing at the edge of a map, we stop writing "there be dragons here," and we start putting in the blanks. And we send somebody, got to go to the North Pole, we got to know what to put on the map up at the North Pole. You got to go to the South Pole, somebody's got to put a map up about the South Pole. So we got to have something to find. And now we got Google, so you can look down to a square yard at any part of the earth, or we're not satisfied with it, and that's not good enough. We really need to chart every square foot of the ocean floor as well. We got to know everything about every corner of the world that we could possibly relate to. Otherwise, we're just ignorant. That's a modern way of thinking. It is, we have to comprehend all knowledge, because when we know everything, we can then do everything. We can solve it. We can go there. We can use it to fix things, whatever. That's all modern. Postmodern is, a little more mysterious. They're willing to say there are certain parts of the world you'll never understand. There are certain features of our existence that you'll never comprehend. There is a mystery to existence that's worth celebrating. And so artsy, craftsy folks are usually thought of as postmodern in general, because, people who do art like the idea that you can't fully explain what it is that makes art art, which is true. There's something about the aesthetic experience that remains beyond our ability to explain it perfectly. Something super rational about it or sub-rational about it, depending on what your perspective is. But anyway, introducing the idea of mystery is doing that. There are some technical words we could use for it, but I think you've got the idea. And that's one of the things we may want to talk about if you have a question. Any of these are the things you may want to talk about. But this is a stark and obvious contrast between the way certain people think in our world as engineers and problem solvers, and other people think in our world as more free-flowing, willing to live in tension or irony. They use all those words, they love the word irony for that reason. Yeah, it's a contradiction, but I'm comfortable with that. Yeah, I'm okay with that. What they're saying is, I don't have to have a rational explanation of it. I don't have to be able to explain it at all. It's a mystery. I'm willing to live with the mystery. I'm willing to live in the dark about this. It is just like night and day when I meet a person who's a modern, and then I turn around and I meet some kid who's a postmodern. And they're not all kids. I mean, T.S. Eliot tended towards at least a good description of postmodernity. So, the famous poet. Community. Second, and this is obviously this is in reaction to modernity. What happens in the modern world is that we focus more and more on the nature of the individual man, and taking away the responsibilities that we have as a community, our social obligations. In fact, social obligations become defined in terms of the individual, only the individual. So rights language, which I love American liberty, I love rights, and so I'll defend it. But every worldview, because men are fallen, every worldview is corrupted. So no matter whichever worldview you hold, you're going to have problems. The modern worldview obviously has a problem because it squeezes God out of the picture, at least in terms of explanations. And the postmodern worldview has a problem as well with its communitarianism, but with all of these things in one way or another. But it also has benefits. So I guess I'm just saying to you, if it's true that men are always going to be wrong to some extent because we have a sin nature, then it shouldn't surprise us that no matter what worldview we adopt, someone's going to look at it and go, I don't like that. That's going the wrong direction. Of course it's going the wrong direction. It's full of people. It's like saying a church would be perfect. A church can't be perfect. That church isn't perfect. Well, of course it's not perfect. It has people in it. But we like people being in it, so worldviews are the same way. So can I criticize the modern worldview? Of course I can. Can I criticize the traditional worldview, the one before the modern world? Absolutely. Can I criticize postmodernity? Of course. They're all fallible, and they're all fallacious in some way, but we're people, so we make mistakes. So don't hear this the wrong way. But rights-based, liberty-based discussions are entirely based on individualism. They are entirely based on what every person ought to be able to be protected about, have a right to, have access to, whatever, because they are a human being. It's based on the nature of human beings. So every human being ought to have the right to life, liberty, and property. I think that's a really good defined way of saying it that John Locke had, that our founding fathers adopted when they got to the Constitution and finally corrected what they said in the Declaration, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is just another statement of liberty. so sort of redundant, but they were afraid to put property in because they didn't understand what it meant. But then they understood it when they did the 14th Amendment and after that, and they put life, liberty, and property. So it's just your ability to keep private property. What does that mean? It means if you have something, I can't take it from you, which means that we base the structure of our entire society on the fact that you're an individual and you get to have your life, your liberty, and your property, and my relationship with you is defined by the fact that I can't take your life, liberty, and property away from you any more than you can take mine away from me, which means we establish a society of individuals. Very atomistic, bit-by-bit society. It's a glorious transition from the world where if you didn't believe the right thing, you faced the Spanish Inquisition. So there's a good reason to adopt rights-based language and move in that direction. And I love rights-based philosophies. Libertarianism is all good with me. I'm all happy with it. Not the political movement, the reality of libertarian thinking, individualism. But it does lead to a problem. It leads to a problem we'll talk about with existentialism in a minute. It leads to the problem that we all become individuals instead of caring about the community first. And there is a time when you ought to care about your community more than you care about yourself. We still had that through the beginning of the 20th century. There was a huge shift in the late 19th century, including that, what ended up being written into the 14th Amendment. But there is a huge shift at the end of the 19th century into the 20th century, but it takes a long time for this one to take place, for people to move away from communitarian thinking towards individualistic thinking. But we do in our culture. We adopt it wholeheartedly. We become very individualistic. And the postmoderns look at that and they go, well, you're a bunch of selfish, isolated fools, not understanding the value of the people around you. Not because they're individual people, but because you need the community around you. And so the postmoderns come to it and they say, we'd really like to go back to being a community. So you hear a lot of church lingo. Churches that are plugged into this, that get this, and whose leaders get some of this, they buy a lot of lingo that I sort of make fun of a lot, but I admire their effort to connect. Because they use the lingo, but they don't mean it. That's what I make fun of. I love the fact that they're trying to connect to these ideas. So, you know, where you go somewhere and they say, they use all the language of village or tribe or, you know, all that kind of stuff where we're all, you know, it's part of our... That's smart use of language. Again, I'm not really criticizing the use of the language, but they don't buy it. So let me explain what I mean by that. If you were really to buy into communitarianism again, where you say the community is more valuable than the individual, then when you decided, for instance, how old are you, Cameron? How old are you? You don't mind me talking to you, obviously. You spoke right up. Okay. So Cameron, you're 14 years old. You're not married, presumably. This is not one of those churches, right? Okay, so at 14, you're still single. Someday, you probably will get married, you think? Good luck with that. I hope it happens someday. At the point where you love some young woman, you think she's beautiful, you've spent a lot of time together figuring out that you have the same values, that you're moving in the same direction, you have the same commitment to the Lord, hopefully all of that. When you get all that figured out and you say to yourself, this is the girl I want to commit my life to. I want to commit my entire life to her, the rest of my life. If you're an individualist, then you go to your dad and you say, is that your dad? All right, okay. So then you go to your dad and you say, hey, I want you to meet this girl. I think she's right. I think she's got the right values. I think she's going the right direction, and I'd like to spend some time. And then he says, yeah, okay, I'll meet her. And eventually, now I'm saying if you're an individualist, you come back and you say, eventually you come back and you say, well, you know, we've been spending a lot of time courting, dating, whatever it is you do, and I think she's the one I'm going to marry. And your dad will say, well, you know, I've got some questions, but I think that's a great thing for you, son. I'm really happy for you. You know, all he can do really is bless it. He's not allowed to say no to it if you're a true individualist. Because if he said no, you might buck up against him and elope or do something else. But if you were a communitarian, not only would you come to your dad, by the way, you can be an individualist and be respectful of your family because the family is really part of the individual in other societies. In our society, that's as close as you can get to communitarian. It's just caring about your family. Which is just funny. But it's sad. But this is what you would do if you were communitarian. You'd go to your dad before you ever even looked the second time at the girl. And you'd say, hey, I'm kind of interested in this girl. Do you think it's okay for me to start spending time with her or to start communicating with her? And if he said no, you'd say, yes, sir. You know, I'll stop. If you were communitarian, even if your dad said, yes, fine, son. Oh, she's great. Yeah, we're committed to this. Oh, I think it's great. Now you're going to get married. Okay, fine. We blessing, hands on, everything's good. Then you'd come to your church and you'd say to your pastor, Pastor, this is the girl that My family has decided I'm probably going to end up marrying. I think she's the right one, but we want to know whether you're willing for me to do that or not. And if your pastor said no, then you'd say, okay, I'll start looking again. That'd be what a communitarian would do. We don't like that. We don't like that idea. I understand why. Because guys go crazy with it. They build cults with it, stuff like that. But that is a communitarian life, where you say what's good for the community is more important than what's good for or valuable to me. More important. When you ask this question, this is the second of the two big issues I was talking about, so I'm spending a minute on it, even though I meant to run right through this. When you send a sociologist to a different society, a brand new group of people, figure out what's going on with them, the first division you look for is this. When you ask the question, what's right? When you ask that question, you look for the answer in terms of one of these two statements. When your conviction is against what your villages or tribes, or again in America the only way to ask this question is to use your family. The thought that your village or tribe or community or church or anything like that would have a say over this is just considered cultish. But in other societies, like when I ask Indians this question from India, when I ask people from Russia this question, which is really fascinating because the country's sort of divided there. When I ask people from other places, the way we ask it is this. If you fundamentally believe, you are convicted personally, that it is right for you to do this thing, and your community is fundamentally convicted in the other direction, they believe it is wrong for you to do that thing, what's the right thing for you to do? In communitarian societies, in India, I get a 100% answer. In African cultures, I get a 100% answer. They say the right thing to do is give up your selfish will and do what your community says. That's your act of courage. That's your act of becoming a man, being the right person. In the United States, nobody says that. Nobody. Unless they're an immigrant. I get it from immigrants, from the other countries. But nobody else says that. Nobody. And I ask here in terms of the family. I don't even ask in terms of, because I mean, it's like a joke when I ask the question about your church or the people who live around you, because we don't even consider those part of our community anymore. We think our family's a community instead of actually being an extension of us, or that we are an extension of them, which is the normal way to think about how we exist in the world. That's how individualistic we've become as a society. Is that a horrible thing? It's got its disadvantages. Again, it has its advantages. I mean, Jesus taught us to stand against the flow of the entire culture and society around us when he convicts us in a direction. So there is a value to saying, I will die alone if I have to be obedient to Jesus. But we're supposed to understand that obedience to Jesus is us being a part of his community, We don't think of that part. But so there is a value to the individualism that I'm talking about, but there's a huge danger in it. And postmoderns look at that danger of isolation and selfishness and egoism that's resulted here, and they say, man, we need to go back to community. Now again, they don't get back there very well. It's hard in this culture to get back to communitarian ways of thinking. And I'm not sure it's not worse, that you don't end up with bigger problems. But that's what they do. So we're not describing the way we want things to be. I'm describing to you the way things are in the culture and the problem we have communicating with each other because of it. So we're saying to our children, hey, grow up, be your own man, develop a conscience, act individually, do what, but make sure you believe the same things I believe. That's a really difficult message. When you're raising your kids in a world where you say, look, you're a part of this family, you're a part of this community, what you do matters to us, not just to you. When you're instilling communitarianism from the time they're a child, then they get it when it's time to make a self-sacrificing choice to be obedient to the commands of Jesus. They get that. It makes sense to them. If they don't, it's sales pitch, and you just hope that they want to follow Jesus when the time comes. Now, I'm putting that in worldly terms. I know it's a matter of the Holy Spirit bringing conviction and transformation to a person who's a sinner and drawing them to himself. I know that. But I'm describing our view of it from the world. That's the reason we face some of the challenges that we face. So anyway, community is one of those aspects. Narrative, you've heard this. Don't give me a bunch of propositions. Don't give me a list of sentences that are true or false. Don't give me a bunch of scientific data. Tell me your story. And so again, churches that are intelligent about it, and again, I respect this. I think they're smart. That some do it right, some do it wrong. But, the truth is, they say, we want to hear your story. I want to know your story. Tell us about the story of the Bible or the story of Jesus or whatever. So it's all narrative. That's what narrative means, the story. And they view that as a contradiction to the modern world's way of trying to list and categorize and outline and control everything. Instead of that, let's just tell the story. You tell the story, and your story will impact my story, and we'll weave the stories together, and in some mysterious way, our community story will be beautiful, and it'll be the thing God wants us to see. So it's a very postmodern way of talking about things. Organicity, the last one I have down there, just means being organic, rather than mechanical, rather than synthetic, being natural, organic. There is, among postmoderns, a real favor to allowing a group to show up and just do their thing. Individuals do their thing, but they do it together in a way that produces something that wouldn't have been produced otherwise. There's a postmodern content to this that even shows up. So as an example, when, I forgot, the president or CEO of either the whole Visa or MasterCard world wrote a book on chaotic structures. And he was trying to say chaotic but organized at the same moment. The chaotic being all of our banks compete against each other to sell our cards. They compete right across the street from each other, and it produces out of this really powerful movement of Visa, so everybody wants a Visa card. He was trying to describe a worldview shift to a postmodern way of building a modern company. That was his idea. Same kind of thing when we talk about it in terms of churches or whatever, that we, instead of trying top-down to hierarchically design everything so that we organize the plan this way and make it happen that way, you just throw a bunch of people in a room and see what kind of worship service comes out of it, and find out what happens. That's a more organic way of working things. Well, it's that way in everything in the way a postmodern would look at it. Okay, so you've got that idea. In contrast to postmodern, this one's pretty easy to work with. It's not hard to fit postmodernity into a place where you can build a bridge and get over to it and start communicating with them. We'll get to that in just a second. Existentialism is a little different. Existentialism is the one that would lead people to say they're atheists, but they're really just adopting the same kind of counter to the modern world. The big difference is that the existentialist looks at how individualism developed and says, and there's no way back. There's no way to get back from individualism. So what's going to happen is you're going to be born, you're going to discover yourself and create yourself, and then you're going to die, and that's it. And so nihilism, nothingness, means that there's nothing that comes out of it. And facticity is just a certain way of saying that in the existential world, if you wanted to look it up later and study it, that Jean-Paul Sartre, for instance, gives us, S-A-R-T-R-E, which has to do with acknowledging the reality that's around you. The reality simply being the things you don't have power to change or do anything about. So, and the biggest one of those in existentialism is death. So all the stuff that you see come out of the culture, movies, art, music, and all this obsession with death, a lot of that's existential culture. And there's sort of this attempt to see in death this fact that we can't escape, but that we need to be, and this is where freedom comes in. So let me again try to paint the picture before I get to the conclusion of it. Freedom, existentialists have a very high view of human freedom. So for them, it's because there is nothing overarching us that designed anything. So there is no purpose, there is no God, there is nothing above. All there is what you woke up with. So look, it's really hard to get some of this across if you don't illustrate it. Illustrations take so long. The movie Cast Away, Tom Hanks, right? Have any of you seen that before I waste time? Okay, so that movie is a perfect statement of like Albert Camus' existentialism. It is all about existentialism, and it's a really good sales pitch for existentialism. The point being that when you see him in the opening of the movie, he's got wide open choices about where he's going somewhere. I can't remember what that scene is. But at the end of the movie, exactly the same thing. Remember, at the very end of the movie, he's standing at the 4 crossroads out in West Texas. He's got a car full of water because part of the facticity he's discovered is you can't live without fresh water. You got to have it one way or another. So he's got a car full of water. But, I mean, he's got wide open road, all 4 directions. That one woman turns up the one road, so we kind of know which way he's probably going to go. But he's got a choice. He can go that way or any of the other ways. And that's the whole point. This is where man finds himself. You're standing out in the middle of a barren wilderness. There are other people around somewhere, maybe. You can connect with them, maybe not, I don't know. But you just got to choose. That's the kind of freedom you talk about in existentialism. Radical freedom to go nowhere, but at least you can go. That's the idea. So, and it's steeped in a lot of other things. So when he emerges out of the plane crash, and pulls up on the shore, and he's got all that human artifact around him, it's just him. That's him being born in existentialism, and there's a social commentary in it too and all that. But that's him being born and him choosing, whether he's going to kill himself or not. What does he make a friend out of? A volleyball, for crying. That's his friend. And when he loses his friend, you want to cry with him. That his friend drifted away, on the ocean. It's like you lost your friend because you just make things. You create it yourself. The world is yours to make. Die, live, whatever. And that's why in that scene in his house, probably the climax of the movie intellectually, the whole point is for him to sit in that house and say, and I realized that my whole purpose for existing was just to breathe, just to keep breathing. See, that's existentialism. So I don't have something else to move toward. I have a choice to make about what I'm going to do. That's all. That's all I have. So the nihilism and facticity is, we die, people die, things die, we can't control that. The freedom is, while I find myself alive, I still have choices to make. Good choices, bad choices, whatever, I just have choices to make. Authenticity is the willingness to use your freedom in light of the facticity, to make choices. So you act as a person who makes choices. People love the language of authenticity, and that's why, again, you'll see this a lot. The language now is not about truth for people who are existentialists, and a lot for people who are postmodern. The language is about authenticity. Not, are you right, but are you authentic? That's the question. Are you authentic? So being sincere, through and through, real. All of that is, in fact, what they mean by real. When they say the word real, they don't mean objective reality like you were talking about with your atheists willing to acknowledge that there was an objective reality. They don't mean that. An existentialist by real means authentic. Are you authentic? Are you real? He's a real person, meaning he's genuine about whatever it is he's committed himself to and doing. They respect that. Okay, so those are the two worldviews that come out of it, or two of the worldviews that come out of it. There are others. With that said, then we get to these issues, which I won't take much time on, but I need to cover some of so you can see the impact this has. On sanctity of life, now again, a postmodern could hold either view on these. But a postmodern who's postmodern because the culture has shifted and he wants to go back to communitarianism because he values, for instance, the community of the church and so on like that, is going to have one view about this. But a person who's postmodern because he thinks modernity and this obsession with human rights is ridiculous is going to look at it and say, some people probably would be better off just not living. That's just the way it is. They don't mean it cruelly. They don't mean genocide, although ultimately I think the arguments lead in directions like that. Slippery slope kind of stuff. They would never arrive there themselves. They just say, there are some lives that are not worth living. For instance, today, well, I'll come to that one in a second. But on these three issues, abortion, that's the difference. I mean, look, the Catholic argument against abortion, and the Catholics have some of the best pro-life defenses in the entire Western world, So disagree with them about theology on everything. I'm so far from being Catholic, it's not even, I have huge arguments with people I know who become Catholic or are Catholic. I just have all kinds of disagreements with them. But on life, dead on. Their arguments for the sanctity of life are profoundly important. And they're built on a guy named Thomas Aquinas, who is considered the Christian Aristotle. He baptized Aristotle. That's how Thomas Aquinas is known from the 13th century. Aristotle that I was reading earlier, because what Aquinas teaches is what Aristotle taught, and that is that if something exists, it exists for a purpose. And if the thing that makes something virtuous rather than vicious, virtue and vice, the thing that makes it virtuous or ethical rather than vicious or evil is that it promotes the end. It heads to the end. It gets to the full maturity of what it's supposed to be. So for a person to abort a child is to cut off a thing before it gets to its purpose and to do evil. It's a natural law argument against abortion or for life. It's not built on just the sanctity of human life. It's built on the fact that for that baby to have existed meant it was supposed to be an adult human being at some point. It is a child human being now, I acknowledge all that, but I'm saying the argument is it's supposed to be an adult human being, and anyone who keeps that from happening is doing evil. You say, well, there are so many that are spontaneously aborted, nature, natural abortions. Yeah, we don't consider that a good thing. We don't say, well, isn't it great that someone had a miscarriage? My daughter-in-law is facing a major difficulty in her pregnancy right now for our first grandchild. And, we don't look at that and say, oh, thank heavens nature's intervening in some way, By the way, they have it under control right now. Everything looks good for the time being. She's about 24 weeks in right now. So really getting close to the point where everything's okay, going to be fine. But it doesn't matter. I mean, even before that, people were talking to her about whether she needed to get amniocentesis, find out if the child has some kind of problems, genetic problems, because sometimes those go with these sorts of symptoms, blah, blah, blah. Why would you do that? Because you want to know whether to get a therapeutic abortion or not. Meaning, you look at life, and you're saying, well, this thing happens to have been caused by the union of a sperm and an egg, but it doesn't exist for a purpose yet, until we give it a purpose, maybe when it's born, give it a name or something like that. And only then because we've chosen for it to. But that's a completely different worldview than what we're supposed to bring as, biblical thinkers, like I was talking about in the first part of the discussion today. We're supposed to bring a thing that says, oh, she's pregnant as a result of what? Premarital sex, incest, rape, whatever. We don't come to it and say, oh, what a tragic accident. The life's not the problem. All the things that led to it, the things that may come out of it, may be good or evil. There's evil all over the world. Every person's born a sinner. Abort them all. That's what we're doing. The point of this is, if we come with this worldview, we have to come to every little embryo and say, God has a purpose for that. There's a purpose for that. And if we intervene, if we try to intervene, we're messing that up. That's what the Thomistic, it's called, traditional argument against abortion was, and still is, by the way, in the Catholic world. And it still is for a lot of others as well. And you can see the difference in the worldview there. The same thing when I mentioned euthanasia, when you say a person is living but they're barely existing, or they're living with a lot of suffering. I've had people say, at a certain point where the pain is so bad or my dignity is gone or whatever, that's the point at which I want you to go ahead and take my life, or remove the stuff so that I can die. And there's a huge difference between not giving care or not accepting medical care and then having someone give you something that kills you. There's a huge difference. I acknowledge all that. There are great complexities in this when you talk about the definition of death and higher brain death and all that kind of stuff. I've taught bioethics for 8 years at Texas Women's University. I get all that complexity. And so I'm not prescribing to you if you have somebody who's going into some place where they're in a persistent vegetative state and you're trying to make final decisions and all that this is just a 2-sentence solution. I'm not saying any of that, but I am saying this. At the point where a person says, where I'm going to lose my dignity or I'm going to lose my ability to get any joy out of life, I think you just need to take my life. I just think it needs to go away. I need a Kevorkian to come in or I need you to pull the plug or whatever, All false language, but the right idea. Man. Completely wrong. And I've said to many, many, many people in different settings, in classes and in hospitals, your best opportunity to love someone and to grow, your best opportunity to do that is when they can't give you anything back. Nothing. At that point, you have your opportunity to serve and to be. So don't go in there and say to them, yeah, that makes sense. You're not going to be able to do anything for us, so we're going to go ahead and take your life. Or you're going to lose your dignity. I'm not going to stop respecting you, no matter what goes on. Let me love you. Let me take care of you. Let me be with you. Whatever it is. That moment is when we ought to shine in our treatment of other human beings. Otherwise, we're not loving them because they're a human being or because they're a person. We're loving them because of what they can do for us. And that's completely different. That's not what we're commissioned to do. But you don't see that unless you believe that God is involved in what's going on in the world every moment of every day. If you don't see that purposive hand of God in the world every day, then you start thinking in terms, had this unfortunate cause that brought it to pass, and there's no good we could see coming out of it. There's obviously no God in control of it, so maybe we just need to. And we start running for the wrong solutions. But you can see where the difference in the culture, it's not, I understand a person wanting to do that, but I have a worldview that won't allow me to draw that conclusion. So whether it's euthanasia, Down syndrome, I only give as an example because 89%, some estimates range higher, some a little lower, but most agree 89%, because some you don't know, obviously, you're speculating. So the percentages and some are not reported for the cause of why the abortion takes place. 89% of Down syndrome children are aborted. So 89%, 90%, that's a genocide. That's saying we don't think that race of people, that group of people, should be able to exist. 90%, 89%. You know? I get the difficulties that go with that. My son-in-law, his sister, is profoundly disabled. She doesn't have Down syndrome, but she has something more that would be equivalent to a very severe form of Down syndrome. And she's lived, I think, 21 years now with her parents, whose lives are in upheaval. You know, I mean, they have to provide 24-hour-a-day care for her. All of their plans, everything that they would have done otherwise, is changed by their commitment to their daughter. And they are, by the way, the most radically pro-life people I've probably ever met. More so now than ever, because they know what it is to give your life to someone who can't give a lot of things back. But man, do they love her. You know, they just love her so much. It's a beautiful expression. I bring that up because you know, when you look at a thing like that, Down syndrome, and all you can think is of the genetic accident, all you can think is of the evil, then you've forgotten that God has a purpose for what He does in the world, right? So my kids, one of the reasons I was leaving early today, Robert, instead of staying through the end of the event, my son and daughter-in-law are throwing this big, down in Deep Ellum, they were on the news yesterday talking about it, charity benefit thing, garage sale and band performance thing of trying to raise money for this family who have a kid who was born with only half a heart. They knew it before the kid was born, and they told them they should abort the child, but they weren't willing to. And so they have this child who's, I think, 7 months old now, who had to have his valve in his heart replaced at, you know, huge expense, unbelievable expense. I mean, you know how that is. And now can't have that replaced again. And during the heart attack that he had, because the one valve he did have failed, he had brain damage, and so they're not willing to do another heart surgery because of the brain damage the baby had. You know, loving little 7-month-old baby, wouldn't be able to talk anyway. He's just looking at the sky and trying to relate to his parents, you know, and be loved. They love him and hold him and care about him. And he'll live, you know, a few more months, and then he'll die. And everybody knows that, unless God just miraculously intervenes. That's what's going to happen. And they're raising money for this kid so they can provide health care for him during these intervening months, because they don't want to do anything less than what they can do, at least to comfort their child and try to take care of their baby. And all of that is seen by people like us as a beautiful expression of parents' love and a brief moment when God allows us to give to someone who's only going to be with us for a little while. And it's seen by the other part of the community as a waste of resources. You know, you should have aborted the baby. Shouldn't have had the baby. They won't say that out loud now, but that's what they said before the baby was born. And I guarantee you now, because I know these people, they're saying, in their hearts, they're saying, yeah, it's just sad that you're having to do that. You should have aborted the child. Abortion would have made more sense. It's a different worldview. Responsibility the same way. I'm just going to stay on this for a few more minutes. I'll just say these really quickly. When you look at a work ethic and welfare, what people are doing is saying, look, I was born into poverty, I was born into need, I was born into destitution, I was born without abilities, I was born whatever. And so what I need from you is everything that I want or everything that I have to have. There are people who are born in such a condition that or find themselves in such a situation that they cannot take care of themselves. They can't. I get that. Someone comes back from a war, crippled. Somebody's born in a state where they're just not able to work. I get that. We ought to take care of them as believers. Whether as a state or not, I don't care. As believers, we ought to take care of people like that. Bring them into our home, care for them as our brother, sister, whatever. So I absolutely believe in that. I'm not criticizing all forms of welfare all the time, you know, everywhere all the time. But I am saying this, when people think that the governing principle over how involved we are in the world is the stuff we get, then they've lost the fact that God created us for the purpose of serving other people. That your purpose for existing is to serve other people. You don't go to work so you can get the money. You do go to work and require the money because you need money in order to live, and the money is testimony that what you're doing is worth something to someone. You ever tried just moving a pile of rocks from one side of the yard to the other side of the yard and getting somebody to pay you for it? You know, I moved the rocks from one side of my yard to the other side of the yard. Nobody paid me for it. Well, no wonder. It's not worth anything to anybody. Nobody cares if you did that. What people care about, they pay for. And what they pay you for is what you work for. And we've forgotten that when you go to work, whether you're a plumber or an electrician or a preacher or something less useful even than a preacher. I'm a preacher, so I can say that. Whatever it is, when you go to work and people are willing to pay you for it, that's a testimony that you have served them. And we were commissioned by God to make our highest priority serving other people. Love one another. In Scripture, loving one another means serving one another. That's what we do. How do you know you're serving someone? By showing up at work. I didn't say by showing up at work and making enough money that you can give it to your church so you can serve your community. That's great, too. I'm talking about actually going to work and digging a ditch for somebody who gives you $100 for it. Taking the $100 and realizing that you didn't do it to get the $100. You did it because God commissioned you to love people because you love Him. And you were willing to serve that person for something they needed more than $100, or they wouldn't have given you $100 to dig the ditch, right? We lose all that because we forget that God created us for a purpose, and it includes serving other people. Genetic determinism I put in here under responsibility because it's I was born this way. God made me this way. God made me as an alcoholic. God made me as a pedophile. God made me as a whatever. They use the word God, but what they mean is genetics made me this way. Genetics made me that way. There was a cause that brought this to pass. So I just got to live with it. That's just the way it's going to be. I don't have an ethical standard against it because that's the way it just happened to be, which is just nonsense. Even if it was caused by genetics, which I don't care about that argument. Even if it was caused by genetics, there's a certain purpose for which God made people. And when we fail to live up to that purpose, then we're accountable to God for that, period. Because there is a purpose for which we exist. That's an insulting thing to say to a person who doesn't think they've lived up to the purpose. And there's not any person who's lived up to the purpose until they meet Jesus Christ and He transforms their life. So what we're saying to every person in the culture is, actually God created you for a purpose, and then we're inviting them in their minds to ask this question: did I live up to that purpose? And to hear the answer, which Paul repeats, by the way, in Romans 1 by saying, so they are without excuse. They say, no, I didn't. So what do? They deny the question. They say, well, God didn't create me for a purpose. I was just born of parents who gave me genetics that made me an alcoholic. That's what I am. All right, maybe you do have the genetics that make you an alcoholic. Maybe so. I don't care. I don't care about that argument. Maybe you do have the genetics that give you a certain sexual attraction. Maybe you do. I don't care. What I want to know is, are you living up to the purpose for which God created you? And the answer for all of us is no, until we come to Jesus Christ and He brings transformation to us. And He doesn't bring transformation to us so He can give us what we want. He brings transformation to us and says, you want to be my follower, really? Then deny yourself and take up your cross daily. Then you can be my follower. Those are His words about it. So we've just lost that in our culture, this huge chasm between us and them. Community, I'll mention real quickly, and I'm going to let you go for another break here. The entertainment industry, we can spend all day on this one. Why is entertainment so important in our culture? You define the industries or the pillars of society, and you have things like the pulpit, used to be a pillar of society, and in some ways it still is. The pulpit, the press, the newspaper, because they distribute the information, allows people to make good political decisions about what they're going to vote for and defend and fight for and all that kind of stuff. Industry, business and what they create in industry. Education, one of the pillars of society. Today, one of the most important industries in our culture is entertainment. Movies, television. This is what informs people's lives. How did entertainment, the gaming industry in the PC world or in the game box world, how did that become so important in our culture? What else are you going to live for in a society that's built around individuals? We think we are working so that we can get enough time so that we can go and entertain ourselves. So we can go and be on the cruise ship and do the things we want to do and be entertained. And then we'll go back and we'll work some more, but only so we can get away so that we can be entertained. You don't have anything else to live for if you think the reason you're here is yourself. Entertainment becomes the priority of your life. And that should tell you, your commitment personally to the entertainment industry is a testimony to your belief that your existence is about you. Now, I'm not saying there's no purpose for entertainment. I'm not saying don't go to the picture show. I didn't say that. I don't care if you go to a movie or not. I don't care if you watch TV or not. I don't care if you listen to CDs or your MP3 player, your iPad or whatever, on your iPod or whatever you listen to. I don't care about any of that. What I do care about is if that's the important thing in your life, if that's the thing you're dying to get to, that's the thing you're always, every day, every night, you spend all your hours in front of a gaming console, and it's time to reconsider whether you're living for yourself or something else. And in our culture, you can just look around at the billions and billions and billions of dollars spent on the entertainment industry, and you can understand where a chasm exists between a Jesus who says, really, you want to follow me? Then deny yourself, take up your cross daily. Then you can follow me. Deny yourself. And a world that says, we got to show you love. Come watch this. We'll entertain you. It's completely different. And finally, divorce. This is the line which is inaccurate, that 50% of marriages end in divorce. I mean, it's accurate in one sense, but statistically it's misleading for a lot of reasons. But even so, it is a powerful statement about the failure of marriage in American culture. Why is that? Because if you teach in a society for individuals to be the priority, you have to first be happy. You have to have some time when you fulfill yourself, when you meaningfully express what your existence is about. Well, in marriage, you're always going to run into a place. I've been married 30 years again. I'm committed to my marriage. I'll die in my marriage. Not because of the marriage. I didn't say that. But I mean, I'm going to die married to the same person. In every marriage, you're going to get to a point where you realize that you've had to give up some goal of yours, some priority of yours, some value of yours, something fundamental that your life would have been about, that you had to give that up to be married to this person. And in an individualistic society, the meaning of that statement is, I got to get out of this. This is killing me. I mean, I'm dying here. I'm not able to be happy myself. And so the people who absorb that, adopt that, they do what is the most devastating experience in life, divorce. I mean, it is, next to the death of a loved one, the most devastating experience people have in their entire lives, going through a divorce. And they choose that because we're so ingrained in the reality and truth of what we lose by being married. But we think that's worth the exchange. It's worth the exchange to try to get that back, the stuff that I cared about, that I lost. Now, I'm speaking to a room full of people where I know quite several of you are divorced. I get that. Not criticizing you for your divorce. I'm not attacking you for it, and I hope you're just faithful to the person you're married to right now. That's what God expects you to do. I'm all for that. All I'm pointing out is that the reason divorce is so common in our culture is because of a worldview change. Not just because divorce became no fault. Why do you think divorce became no fault 40 years ago? Because we were already committed to the worldview that says the individual is more important than the couple. The individual is more important than the community. We were already committed to that. So there are the fundamental divides. Okay, so we've taken 2 of the sessions to talk about the chasm. Now we're going to talk about the bridges. And you can see by this list that we can get through the bridges fairly quickly. But they are important. You can see these are drawn from the postmodern and existential worldview, but they fit perfectly into what we communicate as Christians, into what the gospel contains in it. So these are things we can do without compromise. So during this last hour, we're going to take a short break here, and during this last hour, what we'll do is we'll cover both of these at the same time. How to get back across to start talking to the culture, just to start, and it is going to be by establishing relationships and spending time, but doing that in a way that makes sense to them, but doesn't compromise our commitment to Jesus either. And you don't have to. Now that doesn't mean we're going to have perfect outreach. It doesn't mean we're going to have total success at getting people to come back across the bridge with us, but at least we can communicate the gospel to them, and the gospel is powerful. I mean, it will have power if we can just get that seed planted. So I'll pray with you again. We'll take about a 10-minute break again, and then we'll come back and get started one more time. Father, again, I thank you for time to go a little further down this road, and I pray that you would bless as we start looking forward now to the bridges that we need to build as we communicate the gospel in our community. We pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, 10 more minutes.